Nice. That was a sick intro. Hey everybody, welcome to the Unreal Engine live stream. My name is Alexander Paschall, and today I've got Ryan Brucks and Jerome. I don't want to mess up your last name, and I know I'm going to.
Platteaux.
Platteaux?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the making of Bullet Train, and we're going to get into the more visual and lighting aspects of stuff. So that's going to be pretty exciting. But first, engine news. So let's bring it on over to the big screen. Thank you. First thing is up, we've got the 410 Preview 1 is out. Stephen Ellis here has created a nice preview summary, all the stuff, and a known issues list. So if you want to try out the Bleeding Edge, if that's your thing, then yeah, come in and take a look. Got a lot of nice new stuff, and yeah, we definitely want your feedback. Feel free to come in here, and yeah, I think there's some feedback already. So just come on in and take a try at that. Let's see. All right. Next up, we've got Indiecade. We've got a lot of really cool games that that were being shown off at the Unreal Engine booth for Indiecade coming up on the 23rd to 25th, and it's going to be Icon Disc Jam, which is a lot like I think it's Windjammers, kind of like that old arcade game. It's really exciting, kind of like extreme. What's that called? Extreme frisbee kind of thing. Ultimate frisbee. Thank you. It's a lot like that plus dodgeball and some other stuff. Into the Stars by Fugitive Games, which if you are a regular on the stream, you've probably seen me play this and fly a ship into a star. I am not very good at keeping humanity alive, but the game is really fun. And of course, Rising Thunder by Radiant Entertainment will also be there. The only game I've ever played live on the stream and won anything in, of course. But they are going to be going on kind of all out, showing their updates since we've had them on. So definitely want to check that out. If you're going to Indiecade, drop by our booth, see our people. You know, we're gonna have a lot of cool stuff to show off. Alrighty. And then yeah, later on, at the end of the stream, Chance is going to lock down the submission thread for the Epic Mega Jam, as I know a lot of you are here for that. So for the next hour, I expect to be seeing a lot of people, you know, really pushing that in there. Going ahead and make a, you know, if you're going to submit, going ahead right now, get your post up and put whatever links, whatever information you have now, and just update it as you can. But I just want to go ahead and emphasize, you know, do it now. All right, and then yeah, that's submission thread is right up there and has all the information you're going to need. So, all right, that's it for the news today. Next up, we have our community spotlight. I want to start off on the Answer Hub here. All right, so the Answer Hub top karma earners for this week are, if it will refresh, here we go. Jackie, Shadow River, and Static Void Lol. Congratulations to those guys. Static Void Lol, you're the new one. Jackie and Shadow River, you guys already have badges, so good for you. All right. So, Community Spotlight. Games, we have Diesel Guns. This is a pretty cool game being made by Galani, but he's with LLC. And now this is, I don't even know how to pronounce this, so I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to try. LLC Intezibni. What do you guys think? Intezibni? Is that close?
That looks about as good as I could do.
All right. All right, cool. So this has got a pretty neat kind of feel to it. It's, I want to say a little bit like, kind of like that got Rocket League-ish kind of thing, but it's also like Twisted Metal in a lot of ways. You know, we got a clip. You know what? Let's roll the clip. Clint, roll that clip. Very hard-hitting, exciting kind of thing going on. Yeah. Lots of explosions. Michael Bay directed. Yeah, like you have to have NOS boots, of course, to shoot flames out of the back. That's how you know you're hardcore. This card is a freaking laser.
I could see some Goat Simulator type messages on screen right now. Especially the Michael Bay one.
Yeah, awesome stuff. So that's Diesel Guns for you. It's a cool game right there. Oop. Oh, we're getting caught through some transitions. All right. All right, so the next thing up is a student project called In Extremis, which was made at NAD, which is the same, I believe that's actually the same place that they made Miss Daisy, which we've recently shown off in another stream, a great student project. This one is much darker kind of mood. It was, according to their description, it was a chase scene is what they were required to make, and it's really cool. Let's roll that clip. What's that game? It's not Dark Souls that came out recently, made by the Dark Souls guys. That's wait, Bloodborne. That's it. Bloodborne. Thanks, Clint. Yeah, I was looking at this. I'm like, oh man, it's got that Bloodborne, really creepy, gritty feel. Like you gotta take a shower after running around in that. It's like it's just grime, rats. I like the green stink clouds. It's, oh, gotta do a little dodging. Can't go this way, there's stink clouds. They did a lot of work on the little cinematic pieces. Cool. Yeah, so really nice work, guys. Yeah, Rainbow Marbles posted that, but apparently it was a team of people that put it together. I'll have to give them all some badges. That's cool. All right. And the last community spotlight item is Ancestry, and it's by Pikukatit, I guess. But they've actually got this really cool looking game going here. That's it's kind of a tactical and card based little game, so you can build a deck and then play your monsters out and then tactically do stuff with them. So yeah, really exciting looking stuff. It was released 2 days ago apparently, so you know, take a jump on that, you know, get some of that. I think we have a cool video for that one too. See, I'm a big fan of tactical games like this. I really think it's kind of pretty. These are nice little effects. Like that fist. What's your kind of professional opinion? You like the style?
Looks very well fleshed out for what it is. I mean,
yeah.
You don't typically see games with this much design and all of the different UI elements and stuff. I don't know how long this has been developing, but
these guys have been around for a little while, I think, and they've definitely been putting a lot of love into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a lot of good production values here. We get like all kinds of stuff. So when we see something with really high production values like this, yeah, definitely show them how to do it. Cool. Cool. Yep.
Yeah,
Available
great.
on Steam. All right. Cool. Alrighty. So yeah, hey, welcome to the stream, guys. Let me go ahead and set this up for you. So today, I thought that was the background for a second. That is actually what we're working on. Wow, that looks so nice. So yes, today we're going to be discussing exactly what you guys were up to in your side of things, because we had Nick and Nick on, and they got to talk about a lot of the putting it together and the design decisions. But visually, you have to take a lot of things into consideration. You have to work with a lot of limitations, right?
Yep.
So that's really interesting. So exactly how did that play out for you?
So after the showdown demo, we were like, okay, where is the next cool place we can do a VR demo?
Mm-hmm.
So we had an early meeting around July, and we were like, okay, we know there could be some airport place, we could be in a train station, we could be in a parking lot, we can be,
Mhm.
we used to be in a street for the showdown, so we're like, okay, let's go with train. Can be interesting, and then because train, you can have train passing by, you can have like multiple level in a train station, you can,
Yeah.
so we said, okay, let's go with that. And the other thing we were talking is we wanted to be kind of nice and not use too much like old rusty place. We wanted to be nice and clean
Mhm.
and use a lot of like cool feature that the engine has, like a nice looking reflections and then a good lighting that where we can see a lot of what's going on.
Cool.
So we were like, okay, let's go with train station that kind of look like an airport.
Mhm.
So we went with that, knowing that everything needs to run at 90 frame per second, oversized, so more than 2K, and also stereo. So we wanted to be at that 90 frame per second frame rate all the time. So that was kind of like where we start with. So I can show you some of our
let's jump
reference.
over to the screen and let's take a look and see what you've
So,
been working on there.
Just to show you what was the reference we had to start with.
Mm-hmm. And bring it. Yeah, there we go.
So
Oh wow, where is this?
so this is RDU, which is the
the
airport
airport
next
right
to
near-
next
right
to
nearby.
Riley. Yeah. So we're like, okay, that's kind of a good reference. It's not far. If we need any photo, we can go there.
Mhm.
We haven't really did it, but we spent time there. So that's the idea was also to have something that feels big, and when you're in the VR world, you can see what's going on
Mhm.
very far, but also have some interesting art piece that comes all the way next to you. So that was kind of an interesting things to start with. So we really like those big arches and bright openings. So that was some of the reference there. And then we're like, okay, we can use that to maybe have some gameplay where you can hide behind that, or use some of those monitor and blow them up or something like that. And then like every train station, there's always this language where you need to have those big arches. So
Mhm.
here's some reference that we had, and okay, we need to incorporate that. Of course, train track, and then try to find some more modern version of the big arches. So this one is actually from an airport, but that kind of gives you the idea where we wanted to go.
Mhm.
And then I really like that big curve that goes all the way from far next to you, and that give a good sense of perspective. So we wanted to reuse that. And then those bench, the good thing with those benches is that they can be pretty low poly. So you don't have to model too much of those legs. It's just fine with few polygon than regular bench.
And that perfect like height so you can crouch behind them kind of thing.
Yes, yeah.
It's really cool.
So that's about it. And then other booth, nice trash can. And then of course, like in every airport or every train station, that huge monitor that keep on changing and
Mhm.
give directions. If you don't have that in the train station or airport, it feels really empty. So we made sure that we had that. And of course, commercial and ads everywhere. There's always something like that. So knowing all that, we try to put that together. Let me pull
Did you
that.
guys create some fake ads?
Yeah, we did too.
Oh, awesome. I love fake ads.
So I'm gonna go around, just give you a tour of the environment. So when you start the demo, you basically get out of the train. Let's go all the way there. So you get out of that tunnel, you go all the way there, and the train station, and you stop around here. So the idea is like, when you get out of that, you can teleport everywhere. So I can show you where you can teleport. Whoops. So you can teleport somewhere here, here, then one here, and here. So the idea is to make sure that everywhere you teleport, there's some kind of interesting perspective or interesting things to look at. For example, when you get out of the train or the train, the idea was to have some perspective and looking up, and it's interesting here. And then same thing here, when you are in the VR, in the headset, those massive bar comes all the way next to you. It feels really, really impressive. So that was cool. And then when you get out, you go here, and then having another kind of perspective going down there, or even perspective here. So the idea is to get as much sense of scale and perspective as possible. Because when you have a massive element like that, and everything is big and far, you don't realize how big is it. As soon as you have pillar like this one, you can estimate how far the object is, and in VR it's how everything feels more impressive because of that. So, and then here some same idea, some perspective there, and then when you stand here, having some cool visual here, and then interesting stuff going on here. So that's the idea. And then, of course, one little trick for everybody who's doing environment modeling is having like something interesting in the foreground, in the midground, and very far. And the best way to know if you have something interesting everywhere is just to do that. That can give you how much parallax you have in your environment. So it's good to verify that everywhere you go,
I see, like making the little circle so you can like
go
feel the
around.
depth.
Yeah, and it gives you like, okay, I have a good sense of depth or not. Instead of like, if you go somewhere like that and you're like, yeah, it's a giant map, but there's no parallax there, so it's not that interesting. So as soon as you get somewhere here and you start to have a lot of parallax, it feels satisfying when you're in VR. So that was cool. Lighting wise it was pretty simple. So we knew the engine was good at doing screen space reflection, but we couldn't afford that. So Ryan's going to talk later how we can fake it. So most of the reflection we have here is done by reflection capture. So the idea was to make sure they don't overlap, because as soon as you have a reflection capture that overlap, it's tend to get more and more expensive the more they overlap. So the idea was to create a reflection capture for each how to call that area, this bar, and then another reflection capture for this area, and then another big one for everything here. So just to show you how does it look. For example, where's the reflection capture? Is here. Of course, I'm going to select that. We can't really see the bounds, but
You might need to hit G mode.
yeah. But then I can't really
Oh, you
move
can
it.
move.
Can
Or
I?
just hit P. I think you hit P for paths.
Okay, so here we go. Boom.
There you
That's
go.
what it was.
So you can see like I'm doing the reflection for this zone. So I wanted to make sure stuff from the ceiling align with the ground. The most important was this area where you want to make sure all those lights around here align with here. So that I have a special one for this zone, so you can see here. So make sure it looks as good as possible and less overlap as possible. With less overlap as possible. Lighting wise, it's pretty simple. It's a big directional light coming from outside. It's pretty bright because it's an interior, so it's more than stronger than the regular exterior lighting. So just to make sure everything outside feels overexposed. So that was cool. And then it's just so directional light and skylight. That was about it. And I got a little trick here. So this area is feeling a bit too dark, so I just added an extra spotlight here, an extra spotlight just to fill up the area and get more interesting shadows going on. So I have this little pattern just to create those shadows on the ground that you can see here. And I added another one just somewhere here, just so when the player is standing here, there's some really nice bounce. I mean,
Yeah.
the engine is really good at doing all that stuff. Like really,
I never noticed that piece of art before. Like
Yeah.
when you're in the heat of combat, you don't notice. You guys put a lot of. Cool
it's actually I was verifying that all the reflection in the world were looking good, and I was like, you know what? It looks interesting to see on the sphere. Then sometimes there's some weird
Mhm.
looking art in airports. I was like, okay, let's put that. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's
And
really
then
cool.
yeah, the idea is okay, making sure there's as much detail here, where it's all the gameplay area, and then the further you go, the less obviously it's kind of getting empty. And then the idea was to use the trains just to hide, so there is not, when you stand here you don't feel like, yeah, it's lacking a lot of detail there. The train were kind of filling up the gap.
Mm.
So that was the idea here. And then this train here is just also to give a sense of scale in the scene. So when you stand around here and you see the train, it's always satisfying in VR when you have a object that you know the size, and then you can recognize that in the VR world, like trash can or monitor, all that stuff is cool everywhere. Yeah, that's kind of an overview of the environment. Lighting wise, I can show you that quickly.
And you have some work in progress shots as well, right? From
Oh,
the
yeah.
early meshing.
Yeah.
Quick question. Someone had asked, did you say you're using reflection capture spheres or cubes?
So as much as possible, I was using cubes,
Mm-hmm.
and then I use one sphere just right here. Let me show you how does it look. Reflection. Yeah.
Ooh,
So
everything's so chrome.
yeah. So the idea was here to get that huge bright light that comes from the top align. So that's why I was doing cube reflection for that zone, and then another cube reflection for that zone. So at least I knew I was as much aligned as possible with the light that were interested in me. And then just one here, spherical one. It's mostly for when you stand somewhere here. I want to make sure I have as much intensity light coming from that and reflecting on the ground.
Mm.
So that was it. The most difficult part is actually to make sure they don't overlap. Make sure it's still interesting and not overlap as much. Just to give you a quick view on the lighting on it. So everything is completely blown out outside. We don't see. So that was something we were wanting to do. So we don't have to justify what is outside. It's just super bright. You don't see what's going on. And then here having some really nice looking bounce coming from the exterior, bouncing on the ceiling. And then also having as much contrast as possible. So you have bright area and then also cover area where it gets darker. So it's also always kind of interesting to have very bright and goes to very dark area. So create some complexity in the lighting. That's interesting. Whoops. I'll give you an idea of the overall lighting. It's pretty simple. Bidirectional light, skylight, and then a couple of extra spotlight just to fill up the kind of boring area, and then that's about it. Cool. Oh yeah, one little trick that could be interesting is we actually covered the entire path. So when you get out of the train, so you go from a tunnel, and then we were getting out of the train to a very, very bright area.
Mm-hmm.
So just to ease that, actually we covered this area with an object that's hidden in game, and then so that creates shadow. So when you come out of the tunnel, it feels like you don't go into something really, really bright right away. You just go from tunnel to kind of overcast area, and then in the train station.
And that makes sense too, because if you blind people with white light in VR, that tends to kind of throw them off massively.
Mm-hmm. And then yeah, it's also because the train was a movable object, so when you get out of the tunnel, it was getting very bright right away. So we're like, okay, let's ease that to something where we want it to be. So yeah, that's about it. Oh yeah, let's show the ugly train station before we made it look better. Okay, so that was the very early test where we were just mocking up the major blocks. We wanted to make sure there is like a platform here so that we can stand there, shoot down, enough space for the train to pass by, interesting stuff for the elevator. at one point in the game, we had this elevator, but we were like, okay, we don't know how to make the people move around, so we're gonna use elevator or escalator, and
Yeah, but
it
when you
was
drag
making everybody
people,
sick.
yeah.
So we're like, okay, this is where we start to really think about the teleportation stuff. So we used to have place like that. I'm sure we had more somewhere else. Anyway, so to give you an idea, we try that, doesn't work, so we move on, just get rid of that. And then this was a very fancy lounge, overly complicated. It was kind of blocking too much the space, so we got rid of that. And then you can see like early ads that we had.
Mhm.
And this was just a test to see is the weapon looking good in the environment. So that's about it. So yeah, the environment is the whole goal was to make sure it's run fast and all the time at 90 Hz. And so we made sure everything is as optimized as possible. Not more than 1 million polygon, I think. What was that?
Before hardware instancing, yes. So we
Yes.
have to render the scene twice. So we try to keep it at under 1 million without VR.
Yeah,
And we did a
then,
pretty good job.
as little as draw code as possible. And yeah. Do you want to take over?
All right, sure. All right, so Jerome gave you the overview of kind of the artistic design process for the environment. And he was the one who did most of the modeling and lighting and stuff for this
Oh,
area.
yeah, I forgot to tell. There's lots of people who actually help.
Ah.
I had my little list. So there's Shane Color who helped us, Steve Dietz, Alan Noon, and Zach Parrish. So thank you guys.
Yep. And also Wyeth Johnson did effects as well, and he's not here with us today.
Yeah.
All right. So I helped a little bit on the environment art as well as just doing technical art stuff for
A little bit.
trying to think about things that we could do to fake that we were not able to afford as full features. One example of that, I'm sure this caught your eye because it's thrown in here just as an example, is we did some materials to fake screen space reflections because we found that when we had this reflective environment, we liked the way that the bright windows looked on the floor, but it looked really odd if we had these bright ads and things like that just sitting on there without a reflection. This looked like they're kind of a sore thumb, especially when you parallax. It just made it look like it was floating. So we had to have a solution to have reflections there without enabling screen space reflections for the whole scene because doing this in VR is pretty hard on the video card. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick overview of how that worked. So we ended up using that on a few meshes like that as well as on the characters. Let me turn down the camera speed. So you'll notice on the characters we also have sort of a semi-reflection of the legs, and it kind of changes based on the view angle to try to match. It's not an exact reflection, but it's kind of an approximation. But it just helps as the characters are moving through the environment, it helps them not to look like they're floating. And both of these methods use kind of the same trick. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at this material and kind of show you guys the gist of how that's working, since I get a lot of questions about how can I get this on mobile or how can I get this on this project. So the basic trick is something you've probably seen before. It's basically you take a plane and you put it underneath the ground with a version of the geometry that you want to reflect on it. That part is nothing too exciting. So here's a version that's just vanilla. It's under the ground. It looks like it's still floating though. It doesn't really look like a reflection. So the way that we actually make it look like it's a reflection is by accessing the scene texture. So inside of a translucent material in UE4, you have access to this node called the scene texture. And that includes things like the color, the normal, the roughness. So we can use that to do a couple tricks. For example, here what we do is we get a reflection vector for a clean normal. So a reflection vector is basically like if you shoot a pool ball, it's the angle that ball bounces off the wall. So to map a reflection, you need a reflection vector. But the problem is we have this as a texture coordinate. It's not actually as a vector. So the trick that's being used here is we get the reflection vector of a clean normal, and then we also get the reflection vector of the scene normal. And then by getting the difference between those two, that tells us how much did a noisy reflection differ from a clean reflection. And then by getting just the x and y, we can constrain that to texture coordinates. So then we literally just add that result to the UVs, and I'll show you what that looks like here. We're controlling it with a parameter since it's kind of being faked a little bit. Oop. So that's with adding in just a little bit of the scene normal. You can see it kind of facets the reflection already, and it's starting to sort of look correct. So that's the first aspect of that, is using the scene normal to break it up. And the next is using the roughness of the scene to change the MIP bias. So the way that the engine handles roughness is basically it uses the MIP maps of the cube map. So as you have a rougher surface, it's going to look up into a blurrier and blurrier texture. And that's a pretty cheap way of doing blurry reflection, so I figured the same thing would probably work for these decal materials. So by basically taking the scene roughness and hooking it up to the MIP bias of the reflection texture, and then it takes a little bit of hand tweaking, but you can see we start to get a little bit of noise in the reflection where it doesn't have a consistent blurriness. So some areas are sharper, some are blurrier. I think we ended up at somewhere in between. So basically using those two tricks, you have something that kind of looks like it's a reflection now. And it's a couple important notes are, when you have a texture like this, you want to make sure that you use clamped addressing, if I can find it. Oh, and of course I don't have that. That's actually a bug. So this should be clamped to prevent possibly looking up into the texture out, wrapped around. So by putting that same material in the character, the enemy AI blueprint, we're able to make it look like they are reflecting as well. Oh, there it went. So there's a few tricks to fix sorting things. For example, you'll notice up here right now, the fake floor is not doing it, but it's actually occluding that billboard back there. That's actually just using a trick of decal mask. So if I were to check receives decals on this floor, it would actually show through the floor. So because this demo was fairly constrained and we couldn't go everywhere, we could fix this in a pretty cheap way rather than doing something a little bit more advanced. But there's other ways of dealing with that as well. But just wanted to point that out because you probably noticed as Jerome was flying around that reflections show through a few objects, but that didn't turn out to be much of a problem in practice. So that is that. So the other thing that we came across is material count. Instructions had to be very low to hit 90 hertz. And we had this character asset in the demo that is actually, some people might recognize this as the bad guy from the Infiltrator demo from a few years ago. And we had to reuse an asset for the enemy because we didn't have enough art bandwidth to actually model a new character from scratch. So as we love to do here, we recycle and reuse old assets.
Well, that explains the death bloom. Is it
the death blossom? Yes.
Yeah, the death blossom at the end. I was like a little confused. So I'm like, wait a minute, I recognize you.
So that's the result of what happens when you have a small team and they say, we need a boss. And you say, okay, what can we grab? And it turned out to be that.
Yeah, well, it was cool.
But I just wanted to go back on the reflection. It's very important to have good reflection because that's the only way you can ground every asset on the floor, because if not, everything is floating. And everything was done with static lighting, so there was no movable light. So the only way we could we could ground that is based on the reflection. So that was the most important thing.
And there actually is a little AO for each foot as well. I don't know if you can kind of see it there, but it kind of helps them feel grounded because without it, they just floated. Back to the character. So this character was made with a different art pipeline, not intended for VR. So the material was actually really expensive. It was using matte layer blend with several layers. So, and not to mention he was also, I think, 10 different sections of textures. So we had to get the draw calls and the material complexity way down. So basically what we ended up doing is baking out a texture from in the engine with the final material, but using an alternate skeletal mesh. And I'll give you guys a quick example of what that looks like over here in a separate map. So here we have a little test map that has two little guys here. So this would be the original, that's the original. You can see it has all these crazy sections for every material. And the materials are pretty expensive. And this is the result of reprocessing it. We decided to break it down to just the body and the head and actually use the editor to bake out these textures. If we look at shader complexity, there's actually a bug in this project where it's showing opaque as overdraw. So it's a little bit more expensive than it really is here. But you can see just the big difference that it saved us in material instruction count, just baking those to single layers. So the way that worked is we used the render to texture blueprint. And there's a few changes to this version that's not in the main engine just yet. But and that basically means it can support a skeletal mesh in this version. The version that's in 4.9 right now only works with a static mesh. So basically you just tell it which mesh that you want. You tell it to unwrap. And the bounds, or if we don't look at the guy, it won't render it. Let me scoot him in.
Wow.
There we go. So, and now basically we're looking at an unwrap of that base character with new UVs. So the way that we did that was actually by making kind of a transition skeletal mesh. So The problem was we had a skeletal mesh, but it didn't have a single unique UV channel. Because it was using 10 sections, every single section was, as you can see here, every single section was overlapping using the whole 0 to 1. So what we did for that was we first made a skeletal mesh that had a unique UV2. Oops. UV1. So this is that new unwrap, and this was just done in 3D Studio Max by taking all the various sections and laying them out uniquely. And then we point to that version of the skeletal mesh to unwrap, and that basically gives us all of those textures, but in a unique unwrap. And I'll show you how that was done in the materials. It's basically just a material function that you jam in. Shouldn't be taking this long. So this is it right here. You'll notice it uses material attributes. So this is a bunch of layers that were defining the look of the asset. You can see there's different layers for different metals and nylons and fabrics and stuff. And it's using material attributes, so we use this material attributes node for unwrapping, and this contains all the scalar parameters for the blueprint to unwrap and communicate with. So basically you slap that guy on all your materials and you're done. And then when you check that box on the blueprint, it's telling it to use the UVs to unwrap. And then by rendering out from inside the editor, we get a series of clean maps. And we're using, usually what I do for that is render out using EXR, and that bypasses a few issues with sRGB that you run into with non-EXR, because we have some bugs right now where it accounts for sRGB on the export when it shouldn't. So just something to, I recommend always exporting a test 0.5 brightness material whenever you do render stuff to make sure that you're actually getting a 127 value in Photoshop. So just something to sanity check. And then I made a little comparison here. If I change the FOV, I can actually jump between the two meshes. So this is the original, and this is the update. So the only real differences are there are some smoothing group changes because of exporting the mesh, but we also fixed a few little seams. But the look of the material is pretty much exactly the same. If we go to overview, you can pretty much verify that. As I change between, you get almost no difference aside from a little bit of the vertex normals. But it turned out to not be worth investigating. So that got us a lot of budget back on these guys. Okay. So that's the skeletal mesh baking, just for those who are curious about how can you simplify materials in the editor. There's a lot of options. We really want to make that a code feature at some point so that you don't have to set up all those hooks manually. But currently it's not scheduled. Okay. So some of the other stuff we faked was lighting and shadowing. So I already showed you guys a little bit of the reflection stuff. So we used that same system to help it do some dynamic lighting for the train itself. And as an example, let me go right in here. So if you notice while we're inside this train, you get this appearance that there's lights moving by the outside of the tunnel.
Oh.
But we couldn't afford to render any dynamic shadows in here because the train was really high poly, which Shane Cottle modeled this train interior. He did a really nice job. Although we don't have shadows being baked into this test map right now, so it doesn't look as good as it does in the real map. But anyways, we needed to have the appearance of motion in the lighting without paying for a dynamic shadow. So the way that we did that was using translucent materials, not unlike the fake reflection that you just saw. And I've got a version of that same material over here, just without the perspective stretching, so you can kind of see what's going on. And this uses a material node called world position behind translucency that not many people know about, but it's pretty powerful. And basically, using a translucent material, you can look up the position of the world on any opaque geometry behind it. And essentially, it allows you to fake the appearance of a projection. So this is a translucent material, but it's rendering on the ground like it's modulating as a light color. And to get it to feel like it's moving, basically, we do a quick little, it's almost like an FOV type trick where we can skew the texture to go wider like that. And so normally it's just skewing from the middle, but by also offsetting the location, we can get this appearance that it's actually, the light source is moving outside of the bounds of the texture. And it's kind of interesting, when you have these two values, the perspective and the location, you can combine them into a vector 2, which is just like a position in UV space. So it's using that to do a distance calculation to do the brightness, which gives you that fall off. So it's actually doing exponential brightness, which fakes the behavior of a real light. And we also had messed with doing myth bias to make the shadows get blurrier in the distance as well, but it turned out to not be important, so it just skipped that step. I do have
you really get a sense of where that light's position is as you're scrolling through there, and it's amazing to know it just doesn't exist at all.
So that texture is actually made by just taking a screenshot in the editor of these windows and just drawing a white shape for each window. And then because it's using world position behind translucency, let me find the train. There it is. So it is projecting it, but it's projecting it as if it's from the side with perspective, so you get that appearance. If I actually were to stop one, you could actually line it up, but it's probably not worth doing that right now. So that works pretty well, and if anyone's curious about how that works, I have a simplified material here showing it. I can stretch out this billboard. I can actually make it go in as well. So if it's at 0.5, it's at the center. If it's at 1 or 0, it's at either corner, and then you can push it further as well. The math for that is actually pretty simple. You basically take UVs and you break apart the red and green component, and you change one of the components by a gradient created by the other. So here I take the y component, which is the up axis, and I lerp between either 1 or the amount of skewing that I want, or distortion. And then I add that distortion into the red channel before appending it back. So basically what it's doing is it's making the red channel wider or thinner from top to bottom. And by simply giving it an offset, subtracting the desired position and then re-adding that back in first, it allows you to perform that same distortion basically anywhere in the frame. It doesn't have to be in the middle. So it's just a quick little skew math that works when you combine it with world position behind translucency that helps it feel like a decal. We also used some materials in the editor to help make these blurry sign reflections, which I think, do you remember, was it Sam Dietz or who made the signs? It was one of those guys. I can't remember specifically who made the signs.
It was a, oh man, sorry.
But anyways, we needed to have a blur that faked blurriness increasing as the distance to the surface increased, and that was actually pretty hard to do in Photoshop. I couldn't figure out a filter for it. So it turned out to actually be easier just to do it in the editor. So it probably wasn't necessary, but just another fun little example of the types of things that you can mess with. So then the other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was the derez effect. Probably should jump back into the actual map to show that. So we had a
that really amazing ending effect.
So yeah, the big question was how do we want to end the demo?
Yep.
Like without saying like, okay, that's over, get out.
Thanks, folks. Game over.
Yeah, there was really no ending after you killed the boss. It was kind of like fade to
yeah.
black. So we had this idea in the beginning to make it feel like you're either in some sort of simulation or kind of a matrixy type vibe.
And then the experience was really intense. It was a good way to relax a little bit just before you get out. Instead of
it is really impressive when you're like holding a gun in your hand and you like watch that effect come down and you see like the gun too. And then
behind the post process here is that it uses world position inside of the post process material. And actually, that was something that I learned on this project. Before this, I thought you had to calculate that manually using a bunch of math. But it turns out whenever you're in a post process material, if you look up world position, it just works and it gives you the world position of the scene behind it. So once you have that depth, you can do all sorts of things. Like in here, we use that world position to map a grid texture to the world. Mm-hmm. And then we use the Z value of that world position to basically extract a height mask. So we know the height of the scene, and then we can subtract basically a scalar for phase. And by having a few different levels of those phases, we can have multiple passes. All right, so I'll go ahead and turn this on. I'll have to open the material. I have to drill down a little bit. So this big version of the material here was actually the first version that wasn't used. It was too expensive. So don't get too freaked out. Here we go. All right, so there we go. It's working. Just about that, but I'm just going to demo this version since it is a little bit easier to work with. Here we go. All right, so there we go. It's working. Just wanted to make sure. So basically, this is a single phase value that was driven by a timeline at the end of the level that would cause this wireframe type pass to go down. And then the idea is there's a brief pause between passes, and then you get the second pass that brings the scene to an even simpler form. So at this point, we've removed all scene texture, and we're just using the grid texture with some Fresnel. And then by the third pass, you're just completely eating away the scene down to a virtual plane function. So it creates this feeling that the world was kind of unloaded dynamically. So this is a kind of fun thing to just mess with from a tech art perspective. So we had to try out a lot of different things for what is this sort of noisy electronics texture, because we knew we wanted something that was kind of maybe circuitry-like, but not too literal. So it's just basically some crazy noisy patterns. And so I was going to show you guys how those pattern textures were actually rendered out from inside the editor as well, mostly because I didn't really have any other ideas for how to make them. Let me go ahead and load those real quick. Okay.
And, I love even the AI is kind of cut out with it too. That's really impressive looking.
So the AI has its own version of the DRes, which is a little simpler. But so these are the tiling textures. I knocked out a bunch of these random little patterns.
Ooh, that's the plaid shirt I want right there.
And that's the texture for the train light mask that you saw. But anyway, so these textures were actually made inside of the editor using a blueprint. I'm going to go back to our other little demo map that we were in. So this little blueprint here is pretty simple. Basically what it does is it just makes a grid of meshes. I'll show you the blueprint script because the whole blueprint is about one tiny page. So this is the whole blueprint right here. Basically it uses a macro that this is in engine. It's been there since maybe 4.7. It's called 2D grid execution macro, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It just, you tell it how many cells that you want, and it basically goes and does it. So here I have it hard coded to be 10 by 10, and I'm driving the sector size through the blueprint. And then on the outside, it returns a bunch of functions that you might want to conceivably use for any sort of grid-based math. And you could use this to build terrain meshes, all sorts of stuff. But here we're just using the poly center to add a mesh, and that's setting a material on it. And so this noise amount is basically a random vector, so we can either offset it a little or a lot for each plane. So basically we just did random offsets and then messed with the material. So the way that this gets some extra noise is it's using an additive material with refraction. So by changing the amount of refraction, it really starts to create these different emergent patterns. So if I have the noise at 0, let me turn off temporal AA. If the noise is at 0, you literally just see those squares with offsets, which isn't too interesting. But as we start to add refraction, we start to get this crazy circuitry pattern. It's a little bit noisy here because we have temporal AA off, and I ended up using a high-res screenshot to render those out clean. And because refraction uses the normal map, the normal here is literally just some nonsense. I just made some nonsense in Photoshop. And usually the texture that you spend the least amount of time on when it comes to this sort of thing is what ends up working.
It's the best
because
one.
you just want like some noise, but you don't know what you want it to look like. I knew I wanted circuitry, so there's some 45-degree bevels, and it just sort of works. And then for extra noise, using world position to randomly skew some of the meshes. So some of the meshes turn into parallelograms. Any day now? No? Oh, there it goes. So really noisy. But because we turned them into parallelograms, we have a lot of these 45-degree angle lines going on. And then I basically take this blueprint, duplicate it. And then you notice every time we move it, we get a different random pattern. And then by basically taking high-res screenshots of these and taking them into Photoshop with different levels of blur and stuff like that, that's how all of these different textures were made. By, some of them have some opacity in the middle randomly, some don't. And this is a combination of two different ones in Photoshop. So then we use that as a mask for the DRes effect. And I actually have a test map for the DRes on the characters as well, because it was a little bit of a different one. DRes, let me search. Oop. There we go. So here you can actually see a version of the post-process material on the world. And it's worth noting that we had to simplify that effect to be only a single layer at a time. So let me show you really quick what that looks like. So I ended up making different materials for each pass. So for example, the base pass has just one blend. So it's a little bit simpler than the other material that you guys saw. And by changing which material it is, we change which pass it is. So that because they always line up, we are guaranteed to get a the next pass. So for example, if I switch this to instance 2, now we switch to the second version of that, the third version, and I'm not sure which version that one is. So basically, different versions of the effect. It swaps out the material to where the B of the previous transition is the A of the new one. So it's kind of leapfrogging the effect, if that makes sense. And then the derez for the characters was slightly different. It was basically like a mosaic pattern that was made with this crazy grid pattern. Let me see if I can find the. Here we go. So it was basically supposed to be that these guys were kind of just dissolving.
Yeah, they kind of blow away in the wind.
Yeah, so this is similar to the other effect that you see on the post-process material, but instead of in a post-process, it's just done directly on the material. But here we notice we don't actually use the same amount of noise in our techie texture. We use something a little bit more simplified. It still has a little bit of noise, but it's not as heavy. Phase, here we go. So some example on different materials. And it uses a mosaic pattern to add that slight offset. And it ended up working up decently well. So those two effects kind of have a similar feel. Different colors, although we talked about unifying the colors, but decided it's nice for the enemies to have a red, just because it feels a little bit more unique. But yeah, that's pretty much all the stuff that I had planned to go over. I don't know if
Your
anyone...
first version of the derez was really fast, and we were like, oh, it looks so good, so let's enjoy it and take your time, go like layer by layer.
Yeah, that's right. It was actually just a single layer initially, where it went from the scene to wireframe, and then just kind of fade to black. And we thought, oh, just make it multiple passes and just do something slightly different on each pass. We actually had 4 passes on one version, but it was too much because 2 of the passes looked so similar. They were like, all right, it has to be a significant change between each pass to be worth doing. Otherwise, the player's just sitting there waiting for something. All right.
Wow. So we do have some questions that came in from the chat here, and if you want to look over a few of these, we've got. I think some of these might be better than others, but yeah. How about you covered those first ones about the closing shaders, and you've. I don't know how much you guys know about the time dilation effects, but did you guys work on those at all, or was that all the Nick?
I mean, mostly Nick did that. I have some knowledge about how it's done. I mean, basically, we had a time dilation value that the player blueprint would just look up into that time dilation value. So anything, if it needed to counteract something like that, it would just do like 1 over time dilation times that, So it was basically handled on a per case basis. Although most things were affected by time dilation.
Now how I guess I think they're probably trying to aim more towards like I guess the bullet effects also slow down with the time dilation and all that too. So that's all just kind of tied together in the material work, or
yeah. So we also had to account for that in the materials, which is kind of funny. If you some of the materials were made assuming that they were always going to be only during time dilation. For example, the teleporter effect, if you look at it when you're not in game, it goes really fast. It's like pulsing. I thought there was a bug until someone told me, oh, we didn't actually make it work for non-time dilation because it only needs to work in time dilation. So it just depended on a per case basis, but there was the possibility to correct for time dilation using a parameter.
Oh, wow.
Would it be possible to make blob shadows based on light angle? Yes, more or less you can. So we kind of did that here, but we didn't really make them directional. We relied more on the reflection component, and it was kind of a shadow reflection. But you certainly could do that. Last of Us has a really good paper on that, where they used a bunch of spheres that were bound to the mesh, and they would render out a texture for the shadowing response of the sphere, and they would just look up that texture for all those sphere positions and use it. And you can try stuff like that in UE4 as well. Multiple blobs from different light sources, yes, you can, but it gets more expensive to track the light sources. Usually for something like this on VR, you want to try to simplify that as much as possible. Shadowing for VR. Yeah, we didn't. We didn't shadow.
It was all like baked in, faked out, like as we saw earlier. All the lighting is one way or another kind of fake or drawn on.
And then this next question, The track.
Yes. Was the train track a spline mesh with instances?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Should show the perspective.
So it's actually just a really long straight line. Let me make it longer. So it's a blueprint that we didn't know how many meshes we would need. So we have this blueprint called Tunnel BP. And it just, you'll notice that it's actually using an unlit material. And that was something I just did at the end to take the burden off the rebuild, because we had to rebuild pretty high-res light maps for this to look good. As you can see, there's little contacts for the wires and everything. But anyways, so we have this thing that was basically, how many high poly sections do you want? How many medium poly sections do you want? How many low poly sections? So one of the problems we had was that the track needed to be really long, otherwise you'd see like a hole at the end of the tunnel. So instead of making the track really long, we actually just used the vertex shader to give it some default curvature. And that ended up being pretty funny because it gives you the feeling, if I just move straight through this tunnel, let me move up the speed. I'm going straight, but it makes it feel like I'm going in a curve. So it's just a neat little trick. I can probably pull up the material for that real quick. Tunnel mat. One of these guys. Sorry about that, guys. Rail LOD. Here we go. So this is just a simple vertex shader that it took. Oh, where'd it go? Yeah, it's called MF Tunnel Motion, and basically it takes the distance from the camera to the world, squares it to make it exponential, which makes it have a kind of curved type behavior, and then you give it a radius of curvature and then kind of an amount. So you can see if I start messing with this, if I set that to like 1, that's probably a bad number to put. So putting different numbers for this changes like the curvature, and that was kind of like a pre-baked number. And then changing the intensity is kind of like, was I overriding that? Hang on. I might have been overriding that in the material. There we go. So you can see I can set which direction I want it to go. I can even have it go up, which makes it feel like a roller coaster.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty crazy. So let me turn on the tunnel motion real quick. So where is it? The offset. So if I just do time right here instead of offset, it's probably going to be really fast. Oh, you know what? I need to do frac of that. It's not worth it. Sorry.
You doing something scary?
Yeah, I was going to try to enable the playing this.
You should show the perspective, the force perspective. You know, like we go from a geometry to a plane that has some perspective.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we had to get pretty aggressive with our LODs for the level. And actually, the version of the tracks that are used inside of the tunnel, it's actually just a flat texture with force perspective. It's doing this crazy trick where it's flipping the UVs based on the camera position, so that from one side it shows the force perspective of this angle.
You're
from
serious?
The other side it does from this angle.
I had no idea that was the trick that we used. That's brilliant.
So yeah, we had to those tracks were eating up a ton of polygons, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
and we
like
couldn't really just
wow.
butcher the LOD. So it has this really silly texture like that.
Yeah, and it would have looked horrible if it was just like a couple of simple blocks. So that's brilliant.
And it has a heavy amount of baked lighting in it, which it really shouldn't need. But because the reflection was so intense, you know, you had to have some darkness on the sides. Otherwise,
like mind blown right now, guys. Really impressive.
So all that was merged into one section of tunnel, just to make it a little bit easier. So you can see. Let me see if I find the mesh. Too many disorganized meshes. It went through a lot of different phases, as you can imagine. But yeah, so not splines, but just kind of a pseudo vertex spline. Let me see, what else do we get?
Like I like to say, it's all smoke and mirrors. All video games are all smoke and mirrors.
Dynamic GI, no, this is all just light mass.
Yeah, light mass.
Yeah, no dynamic GI. Like it was not like Kite.
Yep. Better exposure for lighting particles. I don't think we really fully hit that correct on this even, but it's tricky because you want to use a correct exposure with realistic sun brightness and everything. Otherwise, you're chasing this kind of always changing scale. In the very first version of this, we had our exposure inside the level, I think up to like 5 or something really high, and it was causing problems for Wyeth, who was doing effects. Yeah. So we had to agree on a middle ground, even though we wanted to use or Jerome wanted to use a bright exposure for the inside, because that was what he would want to have done with his camera. We had to choose kind of a middle ground so that the the values in our effects didn't have to be really, really dark to not blow out.
Yep.
Because basically, when someone makes an emissive effect, they kind of always start at values greater than 1 for when they want bloom. But that's already pretty bright once you have an intense exposure. How much time did we have to make? Was it like 2 or 3 months? 3 months?
Yeah, like 10 weeks, I think.
So there
I know in the previous stream when we had Nick and Nick on, they got more into the like how it was made and the more like team building and all that kind of stuff and how long it took. But yeah, did you guys were both in from the beginning?
Yeah.
So you guys have been there like the longest. You weren't like jumping in at the last minute just to throw in some stuff, right?
Not really. There was me and Nick Donaldson were working on some prototyping for some other project that was not a game. And then that got changed to we need to have a demo for Oculus Connect pretty much right before the last day we could have possibly made that call. And I actually left to go to SeaGraph. I left to go to SeaGraph to talk about kite demo stuff. So these guys got started about a week, I think, without me. And then I came back, I was like, holy crap. It's like, that demo's halfway done already. But of course, you always make a lot of progress when it's in the shelling stage, and then the progress gets slower as you get into polish and everything. But they did a good job on that 1 week while I was gone. I was impressed.
Yeah, I remember seeing the very early version of it when it was basically like an alleyway and a table in front of you full of guns, and it was just like, just pick them up and shoot them. Yeah, so, wow. Let's see here. Using static light for this project. Static light. What were the build times?
Pretty bad. It's like 2 hours or an hour at the end?
Most of the time I was getting...
And what was the hardware specs on that when you're getting like a 2-hour build?
It was on the...
Our machines are beasts, so it's using the whole farm. Okay. The problem is when you have a few assets that have a high resolution, like for example the elevator mesh, that I think Shane made that. It had to have a high-res light map, and it can't break up the high-res light map onto multiple threads. So 99% of your lighting is done, and you're waiting on this one high-res mesh for like an hour. Yeah. So that's the situation we're always in. So we try to break up some of those meshes when we can.
We had few 1024 light map, but it was not too bad.
On some cases, we resorted to some hacks so that we didn't have to up-res light maps. Like I ended up even skewing the light map UVs of one mesh, because there was stair stepping in the light map, and there was too many of them to up the res. So we ended up skewing the light map res. Kind of a dirty hack, but sometimes things like that work as a last resort.
Just to make it clean.
Okay. I guess that kind of works into the next question of since you guys were really concentrating on these are like our big bottlenecks as far as big things. What was the most expensive technical effect you had to leave in?
For me, it was the D-res post-process at the end.
That was it. I mean, that seems like it's a lot of stuff going on. So
yeah, it's heavy on the on the pixel shader, and that's where we have the least budget because we're already pushing the GPU so hard.
What was I guess do you know like what exactly is this just like the multiple layers that you're running, or what's the exact?
In that case, it was because I'm basically applying a virtual world-aligned texture on top of a post-process material. So not only does the engine have to render the entire scene as it is, then it has to take, for triplanar projection, 3 more textures mapped onto the scene, and then create gradients based on all that height math that I did, and then do the mosaic offsetting. So it's just a lot of shader math.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up simplifying some of that, like the mosaic math ended up being baked into just a grid texture, so that we weren't doing that manually in the shader. I'm not sure if I have that at all. Nothing too fancy. But it was basically using the same texture that we used for randomness on the ground. So let me see if I can find that. Environment. I swear I can read. Props. Oh, I'm not looking in the right place. Oh, too many folders. I'm just going to type. Here we go. And then... No, materials. I am not finding this thing. Look for textures. There we go. So we just use a texture like that for doing that mosaic offsetting, and that's what during the post-process effect causes some pixels to be ahead of others, and also the same thing for the D-res of the character. So we actually resized this at one point and used nearest neighbor filtering. Oh, here it is. No. Oh yeah, so that's another note for performance. So by the end of this, we had one of our guys over in Seattle, Chad Taylor and Ryan Vance, looking at profiling using RenderDoc pretty aggressively. And so I was kind of the guy here in Raleigh who would look at their detailed breakdown and see what I could do and fill the rest of the team in on what sort of tweaks needed to be made. and just also working with them, they were free to read that stuff as well. And it turned out that we were using a texture like this pretty much as a noise for like all the floors and walls to give all the panels random offset, and it was wasting a lot of performance on the GPU looking up all these high-res texels, so it was a 512 when we could get the same effect by making it a 16 by 16 and then using nearest neighbor filtering. Where is that? Today's not my day for finding things in the editor. Texture, here we go. So filter, normally it would be bilinear or default. So yeah, we don't want that blur. We want
you want to be very sharp.
We change it to nearest neighbor, and that's just a little trick. That won't really show up in profiling on a PC game very often because the cost of the texture resolution is so minuscule. But when you're to the point where you're measuring like microseconds to hit 90 on the GPU, something like that might show up. So most people probably don't need to worry about things like this, but when you're really trying to get down to the wire, it's good to know. So that's the same texture that's used for giving random normals to the ground. So it's just like, that's why the reflection is kind of broken up, and same for the walls. So it's a pretty effective thing that's pretty cheap. I guess that's pretty much it. Oh, the other thing that I forgot to mention was the instancing.
The instancing, yeah.
So we had problems with instances on this whole project, just because it's a pretty busy train station with a lot of stuff, and we had to get the draw calls down to somewhere between 500 and 1,000. So we made this blueprint that you drop into the level, and then you just select meshes that you want, and you convert them. And I can show a quick example of that. Let me see if I can find something that's not already instanced. That's going to be the trick.
Yeah, I don't think there's that much left.
So these tracks right here. So let me drop in this blueprint. We drop in our guy, we put it somewhere. We lock the selection. Then we're just going to select a few things. Then we still have this selected over here because we locked. We're going to select a blutility for make instances from selection. And this works because this blueprint is a member of, it's based on editor placed utility base, which is a blutility class, and that gives us access to the selection sets. So now when I hit run, oh, I forgot we have to hit refresh. There we go. So I don't know why those are unlit. There we go. It was compiling shaders. It had to make an instance. So now if I select this, I've got a this mesh now contains those 4 instances, and you can actually we make an array of transforms, although they're not exposed here. But over here, if we select one of these guys, you'll see we actually have the ability to still move the individual meshes. And that's just basically one of these transforms in this array. We're moving it around. So if you look at the construction script of one of these meshes, it's pretty simple. It's basically, are we making regular meshes or not? And if it's not, then we make instance static meshes. And then we get everything from that transform array, which was passed from the selection set, and we just add instance for each one of them, and we get the position from that array. So that's why when we move this, it's still just recreating the mesh from the array.
And you want to do that group by group, not having like all the benches in one.
Exactly. So you want to be smart about that, because when you instance things like that, now it's going to render all of these benches anytime you see one of them. So it wouldn't make very much sense to go merging like these benches across, because you make the bounds much bigger, and it's going to keep the bench from LODing effectively, because the LOD will be based on the screen size of the bounds. But it helped a lot for cases like this, where this was just like dozens of meshes before. So we broke it up into like one group, another group, another group. So you can see it gets pretty, there's quite a few groups of these little things, you know. So that I don't know how much that cut off the draw call. I would guess somewhere between 25-30%. You can't always do as much as you want, but you can do quite a lot. And then the other thing we used was the in-editor merge tool. Oh yeah, speaking of the fake lighting on that track, you can really see it in over here. Notice for some of these, we didn't even bother to use the actual mesh with the LOD. We made a version of the mesh that was a merged 2x6. So it's obviously just what it sounds like, 2 across by 6 long. And it's all using the LED material. So we use that to fill out all of the, little under train areas, just so that the engine didn't even have to consider those for culling and stuff like that on an individual basis. So just all little things that we threw in to ease the burden on the renderer. And it's still, we got really, really close to hitting 90 consistently. I think during the end with the post-process, it actually jumps over budget slightly, depending on where you turn your head. Because it just became pretty difficult to optimize it.
I think your tenor section was a solid 90.
Yep. Material nodes.
Let's see here.
I would love to do a Wikisol post on some of these tricks and things
Yeah.
like that. The problem is it's hard because a lot of us have already been scheduled time on other projects now. So
Yeah, when it comes to creating documentation, it's we have to kind of grab you and hope that we have enough time for those kinds of things. All the
next question is kind of same. Yes, we
Yeah.
would love to get a rolling optimization, and that's still something that we're learning as we go. Getting editor performance in VR is not an exact science yet, and I'm even sometimes we search and find things on Reddit that we didn't know about because so many people are out there trying things and crazy flags. But it's a good point. We definitely are not doing the best we can centralizing that information.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be some sort of post-mortem out of this based on based on how much interest there is in having one. There's a question here. How would you allow for reversing time? I don't think that's up your guys' alley in particular. It's more of a Nick and Nick question. Maybe next time we have them around, we could talk about reversing time as a game mechanic.
I think you would need something else
You
than
would
what we
need a
did.
lot of back-end work for that. It's actually much easier to go slowly forward in time than to completely reverse.
Yeah.
Could you show us some of how you did the teleport transition? Because there is kind of a blink. No, did
I
either
think
of
it
you
would
work
be
on
more
that?
Wyatt.
Yes, but
Okay,
we don't have
Wyatt-
Wyeth here.
Wyatt
Wyatt
worked on that one.
Yeah.
But I do know a little bit of a few things that he did that made it feel cooler. For example, you actually use your hand to point at which teleporter that you want, which turned out to not be that intuitive, but it was better than using what you were looking at. So the first version of the teleporter, you had to look at it with your eyes, and it would go to that teleporter. And that turned it out to be a little confusing to people because they didn't really have any awareness of that they were now where they were looking because everything was gone. So Wyeth did this whole thing where as you turn your hand, the beam will start to bend and curve toward the selected teleporter.
I noticed that.
So it gives you information about what you're about to select, because otherwise you have this problem of you're sweeping your hand, shit's just lighting up all over the screen, but you don't know why or where.
Oh,
so once you have the
kind of
teleporter
blinks.
giving you that feedback of it's more bent the further away and then it's straight when you're right at it, you really know how far off it you're aiming. And that helped to give that sense of control.
I feel like there was some level of force feedback to that too, because I remember as you start aiming more towards it, and less the more straight it becomes, the more you kind of get a feel of that.
That would definitely be a Nick thing as well. So
I'll have to
he
check
set
that
up the
out.
vibration for the controller so that everything had some sort of an action, whether you're getting shot or
Passing
firing.
over object or
The
playing
overlap.
with
That
the
was a
guns.
good thing.
Yeah,
too.
just touching stuff is pretty cool. Yeah.
Hardware-wise, it was
Yeah.
originally supposed to run on a 970, but
970.
we ended up showing it on a 980, I believe.
So the question was, what did we run it on hardware-wise?
I think
know
I'll
this
take
was a
machine-wise.
question that came up in the last stream as well, and they were able to answer it a little bit better what was on it, but it wasn't actually what I expected. It was actually pretty strong hardware. So
We used the frag boxes for this,
Yeah.
and they're pretty beefy. I'm pretty sure we showed it on a 980, but it runs. It's almost running at 90 on a 970 because that was our original spec that we were told to hit. And then we ended up using the 980 because it was available, from what I understand.
And that's actually kind of similar to the Oculus Mint specs, isn't it? It's like a 980 or something.
Yeah,
like
that's
that
what.
is
I think they went
want.
970 is what they
Is that what they
suggested.
said?
I believe.
Okay,
yeah.
so we're relatively close.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
pretty-
and there was
it's pretty
there were some optimizations done
close enough.
after our initial deadline. For example, Ryan Vance did this thing with reflections that makes it pick only one reflection per mesh, but try to pick the closest best one instead of compositing them together using the compute shader. Nick told me that saved almost a millisecond. So if that is true, then we should have no problem running on a 970 after that.
All right. All right. So the last question is more of a, I guess this is more of a cool idea. It's could you somehow use the DRes texture in a level stream / portal between levels? Yeah, I could see that just being you click on it and then you just have that float drive forward and phase through. So yeah, I think that's probably pretty doable. All right. And then we have a game jam question that came in. How can we make a link to our game in our thread? So if you just post the full HTTP, the full URL, I'll just copy paste it. If the link isn't, if you're having some trouble setting up the link, don't worry too much about that. I'll just do it kind of manually. All right. So there's two quick things that I want to cover as we keep going on. We keep getting more kind of cool stuff that people just kind of donate to us and hey, you should give this away on the Epic Mega Jam. So guess what? For anyone out there who is curious about VR, this is a Gear VR 2. So this is for the Note 5 and 6, I think. So yeah, it doesn't work on my 4, but we're going to be raffling off one of these bad boys as well. This is actually Chance's from Oculus Connect, so he is very great, very generous to donate that. And the other thing here is this is a large water bottle that we got from a thank you as you can see. This is pretty cool for taking around. It's got the logos all on it. It was a marketing company.
You need a big straw with that.
Yeah, you have to get a huge straw. it's for holding your enormous like Slurpee sodas and all that. Yeah. So yeah, a marketing company sent that over to us. It's really cool. And yeah, I think something else happened where I think we got an additional copy of Houdini from Nick Bullard Bradley, which we'll be giving away in a different way. I think that might just be a raffle also. But we're going to update the additional things that are going out. And yeah, I mean, we're just kind of blown away with how much kind of cool stuff showed up out of this. And people just came out of the woodwork to give us things to give out as prizes, which is really awesome. But Chance is probably locking the thread as I speak. So if you haven't submitted yet, you might want to like go in there, go ahead and make your post, whatever, get going. So we're aware that, we've been kind of aware of this because a few people contacted us that some of you are taking the time to make your game. It's really great, but your connection to the internet isn't super awesome. So when you're uploading it to us, it's a little bit slower. We're going to try to do what we can to accommodate that. So, just try to get it in as soon as possible, get that forum thread post going. Just try to get it in as soon as humanly possible at this point. But let's see here. You can still edit your posts and add in stuff. And right now, I think Aller might. So Michael Aller, who is going to be on next week for announcing winners and stuff, he should be streaming already or is about to start streaming, or he might actually be streaming himself downloading the games before he actually plays them. So go on ahead and check that out. It's twitch.tv/awesomealler. And I'm sure he's already in the chat. Actually, I saw him already, so I know he's probably talking about it too. You're going to want to check that out. That's going to be crazy fun. And let's see. Yep, next week is results. Aller on site. Should be very exciting. You're actually going to see the man here sitting in person, maybe not in the specific chair, but he will physically be here, which is totally like a new thing for me. That's going to be awesome. It's the first time I'm going to actually get to meet him in person. Cool. So that's really cool. Thank you guys so much. Ryan, Jerome, it clearly you guys are geniuses and wizards. That is the most neat stuff I've seen for rendering in a while. So the people seem to really enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming out and showing it all to us.
Thanks for having us.
We'll
Thank you.
We'll see you all next Thursday, and of course on Tuesday is going to be the training stream. So see you all.
See you guys.
Have a good one.
All right.